These are the gods who shaped kings and crushed empires. They are the beings said to have created humanity and nearly wiped us out. These are the ones whose names were carved into clay long before the Bible, long before history. This is Pantheon mythology, and these are the Anunnaki. If you too shaped kings and crushed empires, check out Pantheon Apparel, our clothing brand inspired by mythology, legends and folklore. We ship worldwide and we're rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. The word Anunnaki comes from the Sumerian for offspring of Anu. Anu was the sky god, the distant, celestial father of the divine order. And the Anunnaki, they were his bloodline, a powerful assembly of gods who stood above all others, tasked with shaping the world and maintaining the balance between heaven, earth, and the underworld. Their story begins over 5,000 years ago, in the cradle of civilization, in the land known as Sumer. In the city of Eridu, said to be the first city ever built, the Anunnaki appeared on cuneiform tablets as rulers, judges, and creators. But they were never a single, fixed pantheon. They were a class, a council, a force. A Sumerian civilization gave way to the Akkadian Empire. The Anunnaki changed. Their names, their roles, their meanings shifted. In Akkadian texts, they became more structured, no longer just cosmic overseers but judges of the dead, beings of fate who presided over the underworld. In later Babylonian and Assyrian periods, new gods like Marduk rose to power, pushing the older deities into the background. Yet still the Anunnaki remained, sometimes reinterpreted, sometimes renamed, but always present, looming in the background of myth, watching. Some were worshipped openly, others were feared in silence, but in every version the Anunnaki were never minor spirits or footnotes. They were the ones who ruled before the gods had names. The Anunnaki were not a council of equals. Power flowed from the top down, and every god had their place. Their roles reflected the structure of the world itself, heaven above, the earth in between, and the underworld below. Each deity ruled a realm, commanded a city, and shaped the fate of mortals and kings alike. At the top was Anu, the supreme god of the sky. He rarely descended, rarely intervened, but his authority was absolute. Anu was the source of kingship, the one who issued mandates from above the heavens. His temple would rise in Uruk during later periods, but his name belonged to an older age, an age when the gods still walked among men. Below him was Enlil, the god of wind, storm, and command. He ruled from the city of Nippur, where the sacred Echo temple stood as a beacon of power. Enlil was an enforcer of cosmic order, the one who decided the destinies of cities and kings. He held the tablets of destiny, and with them he could alter the course of the world. Even the other gods feared his judgment. Then came Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and mischief. He lived in the watery depths beneath Eridu, where the sweet waters of the Abzu, Sumer's underground ocean, were said to originate. Enki was a creator and a protector, but also a trickster. He broke decrees, defied consensus, and saved mankind when the others called for its destruction. His knowledge was dangerous but essential. Inanna was love and war, fertility and destruction. From Uruk, she ruled with a volatile mix of passion and power. She seduced kings and led armies, conquered cities, and descended into the underworld. She was unpredictable, deadly, just as likely to bless as to curse. Later, she would be known as Ishtar, but the core remained the same. She was the storm in human form. Ninhursag was the Earth Mother, the goddess of birth, mountains, and wild things. She shaped the first humans, healed gods, and oversaw fertility. Her presence was quieter than Inanna's or Enlil's, but no less vital. Without her, life could not continue. Utu, called Shamash by the Akkadians, was the god of the sun and justice. From sunrise to sunset he saw everything. His light was not warmth but scrutiny. He watched kings in their palaces and criminals in their shadows. He brought law, order, and truth. And then there was Nana, the moon god, who watched over the night. From his temple in Ur, he marked the rhythms of time, months, tides, rituals. His silver light brought calm, dreams, and prophecy. He was the father of Utu, and in some stories, the father of Inanna. Together they were the greatest gods of Mesopotamia, not just forces of nature but rulers of civilization. Their temples stood at the heart of every city. Their names were written into the foundations of law, myth, and power. They were the Anunnaki, and the world was theirs to shape. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings did not rule by conquest alone. They ruled by permission. Permission granted not by men, but by the gods, by the Anunnaki. Kingship was believed to descend from the heavens, a sacred trust passed through the divine order. Without their favor, a king's crown was meaningless, his rule fragile. The earliest Sumerian texts speak of kingship as a gift, one that was lowered from heaven to specific cities, first to Eridu, then passed to others like Uruk, Ur, Nippur, and Kish. These transfers weren't political shifts, they were divine appointments. The Anunnaki chose which city would lead, which dynasty would rise, and when it would fall. Central to this authority were the tablets of destiny, powerful objects said to contain the decrees of the universe itself. In some myths, they were held by Enlil, in others by Anu. Whoever possessed the tablets held control over fate, kingship, and law. But they were not always safe. In some stories, they were stolen by rogue gods or monstrous beings, challengers to the order that triggered chaos and war. To secure favor, rulers built temples, commissioned hymns, and poured wealth into offerings. These acts were more than ceremony. Within each temple stood a statue of the god, carefully maintained, dressed, fed, and honored as if it were alive. Because in the minds of the people, and the kings who ruled them, it was. These statues were vessels, physical channels for divine presence. Through them, the gods were believed to hear, speak, and judge. Kings served as intermediaries between the mortal world and the heavenly court of the Anunnaki. Their legitimacy depended on ritual, obedience, and the belief that they ruled not by their own hand, but by command. And if that belief faltered, if the gods turned away, so too would the people. The Anunnaki were present in daily life, not as distant symbols, but as beings who listened, judged, and responded. Their presence filled the temples, which stood at the heart of every major city, centers of worship, law, and power. Each day, the gods were tended to by priests, fires were lit, incense drifted through the halls, statues were washed, anointed, and dressed in fine garments. Offerings of bread, dates, beer, and lamb were laid before them. These meals were not symbolic. They were believed to sustain the gods and keep the balance between mortal and divine intact. Worship shaped the rhythm of life. Hymns were recited at dawn and dusk. Prayers were offered before planting, harvest, childbirth, and war. Every gesture had meaning, every ritual carried weight. Festivals brought entire cities together. Statues were carried in processions through the streets, taken to rivers or fields, renewing the bond between the gods and land. Through these rites, people sought favor, fertility, rain, protection from illness or invasion. In return, the Anunnaki were honored, fed, and kept close. Religion wasn't just belief, it was maintenance, a contract, a sacred exchange. Before humanity, the world was already ruled by gods, but not all gods held equal power. The Igigi, a younger group of deities, were burdened with endless labor, digging canals, shaping the land, maintaining creation itself. Over time, their resentment grew. They were divine, but they were servants, and eventually they revolted. They laid down their tools, they gathered at the house of Enlil, and they demanded relief. The gods, facing rebellion within their own ranks, turned to Enki, the god of wisdom and invention. His solution was simple, but irreversible. If the gods would not toil, another being would take their place, one who could work, obey, and be controlled. According to the Atrahasis epic, Enki took clay from the earth and mixed it with the blood of a slain god. That sacrifice, violent and permanent, passed something divine into the new creation. From this fusion, humanity was born. Not in love, not in grace, but in function. Humans were created to serve, to farm the fields, build the temples, and honor the gods. They were intelligent, capable, but ultimately expendable. Life was a gift, but it came with obligation, and in the eyes of the gods, mankind's purpose was labor. It was a creation born of necessity, a solution to a divine problem. And from the beginning it was clear. We were not made to rule. But the gods had not accounted for one thing: noise. As the generations of men grew, so did their numbers. Their voices filled the cities, fields, rivers. They sang, they prayed, they argued, they built, and to Enlil it became unbearable. He was not a god of patience. He was a god of command, and he resolved to silence the noise. He called for their extinction. The assembly of the Anunnaki approved the decision. A great flood would wash across the land, wiping humanity from existence. Order would be restored through annihilation. But Enki did not agree. Bound by oath, yet moved by sympathy, he acted in secret. He spoke not to a king or a warrior, but to a man named Atrahasis. In some versions of the story, the name is Zeusudra, but the message is always the same. Build a boat, seal it tight, gather your family, take the animals, and wait for the storm. When the flood came, it swallowed the world. Cities vanished, temples crumbled. The noise stopped, and in the silence the gods mourned. What they had destroyed was more than labor. It was life, worship, praise, offerings. The system that sustained them had been drowned. In their regret, the Anunnaki allowed survivors to live, but with limits. Plague would strike the cities, famine would cull the fields. Human lives would be shortened, populations controlled. It was mercy filtered through fear, a lesson written in water. The first apocalypse, and humanity survived, but only just. The Anunnaki did not rule only the land of the living. Their reach extended into death. According to Mesopotamian belief, death led to Kur, the land of no return. It was not a place of torment, but of stillness, where souls wandered in darkness, stripped of memory and light, and even there, law remained. At the center of that realm stood 7 judges, identified in later texts as part of the Anunnaki, enforcing order beyond the grave. Even Inanna, one of the Anunnaki, was not exempt. When she descended into the underworld, she passed through 7 gates. Each one stripped away a piece of her power. By the time she reached the throne, she was exposed. Powerless, she stood before the judges, and she was sentenced to death. Presiding over this realm was Ereshkigal, her sister, unyielding, final. At her side was Namta, the enforcer, carrying out judgment without question. Together they maintained a system where no soul, not even a god, could escape the law. The story of Inanna's descent reveals something deeper about the Anunnaki. They were not just rulers of civilization, they were enforcers of structure. Even their own were bound by it. In the world above, Inanna reigned. But in the world below, she stood like all others, before the law, and without defense. The Anunnaki ruled from above, but not all knowledge came from the heavens. In the earliest days before the flood, the gods sent messengers, the Apkallu, semi-divine sages, part human, part something else. They emerged from the deep, bearing gifts mankind had never known. They taught agriculture, writing, ritual, astronomy. Civilization did not rise by chance. It was taught. There were 7 of them. They served the world before it drowned, guiding kings, shaping cities, preserving order. But after the flood, everything changed. The same wisdom that once elevated humanity now seemed dangerous, forbidden. Some say the Apkallu were banished. Others say they were transformed, becoming fish-like spirits, hiding knowledge from those no longer trusted to wield it. Their legacy blurred the line between blessing and threat. Too much power in mortal hands was always a risk, and the gods rarely gave without consequence. 7 sages, 7 judges, 7 Anunnaki. The number returned again and again, a symbol of structure and a warning. Some knowledge was never meant to be held. Without writing, the Anunnaki would have vanished. No temples remain untouched, no statues unbroken, but the stories survived, etched into clay by the hands of scribes. In ancient Mesopotamia, scribes were more than record keepers. They were theologians, editors, and sometimes propagandists. They preserved old myths, but they also reshaped them. With each new dynasty, each shift in power, the gods were reinterpreted to fit the present. Nowhere is this clearer than in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. In its verses, the god Marduk defeats the primordial chaos and becomes king of the gods. He is granted control over the heavens, the earth, and the fates. But Marduk was a newcomer. His rise came at the expense of older gods like Enlil and Enki, whose former authority had quietly diminished. It wasn't just myth, it was politics. The scribes who inscribed these tablets weren't just preserving beliefs, they were shaping them. They chose which gods to elevate, which stories to repeat, and which names to fade into clay and silence. Without them, the Anunnaki would be forgotten. No names, no flood, no council of gods. Just dust. No empire lasts forever, not even the gods, not even the Anunnaki. The cities rose and fell, so too did the gods that ruled them. The Anunnaki, once the architects of the world, began to fade. Their power was fractured, their names rewritten. In Babylon, it was Marduk who reigned supreme. In Assyria, it was Ashur. In later texts, Nabu took on the mantle of wisdom once held by Enki. Some Anunnaki were absorbed into these rising gods, others were demoted to the underworld, stripped of their cosmic roles and confined to the shadows. And many were simply forgotten. Their statues fell, their rituals ceased, their temples became dust. But the clay remembered. Their names still echo in broken tablets buried beneath ruined cities, in fragments of hymns, in half-erased prayers, in myths retold by cultures that barely remembered who they once were. The Anunnaki vanished from the world above, but never entirely. In 1976, Zecharia Sitchin, the Azerbaijani-American author with no formal training in Assyriology, published The 12th Planet. It was unlike anything that had come before. Drawing on Mesopotamian mythology, biblical texts, and planetary speculation, Sitchin claimed that the Anunnaki were not divine beings at all. They were ancient astronauts. According to his theory, the Anunnaki came from a distant planet called Nibiru, a hypothetical world beyond Pluto that enters the Earth's orbit every 3,600 years. Sitchin believed this rogue planet housed an advanced alien civilization that visited Earth in the deep past. These beings, he claimed, descended to Mesopotamia in spacecraft, colonized the region, and began extracting one vital resource: gold. But this wasn't gold for ornamentation. Sitchin suggested that the Anunnaki used it to repair their planet's failing atmosphere, and when mining became too burdensome, they turned to bioengineering. The gods of Sumer were reimagined as geneticists, splicing their own DNA with the early hominids to create a labor force. Humanity, in this retelling, was not created from clay or born of divine intent. We were the product of an alien experiment, useful, disposable, controlled. Sitchin pointed to Sumerian tablets and symbols as evidence, interpreting winged discs as spacecraft and stylized gods as astronauts in suits. He claimed the Epic of Creation, the Atrahasis, and even the Book of Genesis held coded references to cosmic events. But his translations were deeply flawed, selective, speculative, and dismissed outright by academic experts in the Sumerian language and culture. To scholars, it was pseudoscience, but to readers, it was something else entirely. The 12 planets sold millions of copies, and it became the cornerstone of modern mythology. His ideas seeped into documentaries, novels, podcasts, YouTube channels, and TV shows like Ancient Aliens. The phrase, the Anunnaki, was no longer confined to textbooks or mythological footnotes. It became a buzzword, a mystery, a warning. And it didn't stop with Sitchin. Today, the Anunnaki are central figures in countless alternative history theories. Some believe they still influence global elites, others claim they never left. From Reddit forums to cult ideologies, they've become symbols of lost knowledge, suppressed truth, and cosmic manipulation. Where once they ruled Eridu and Nippur, now they rule algorithms and search bars. What Sitchin did was powerful. He took myth and reframed it as misunderstood history. He blurred the line between ancient religion and science fiction, and in doing so, he gave the Anunnaki something no empire ever could: a second life. They were no longer the forgotten gods of a ruined civilization. They were the architects of humanity, and maybe, in some minds, they still are. Their temples lie in dust, their worship a forgotten echo, their names broken whispers on clay. But some names cling to the dark. They don't vanish. They wait. We were made for a purpose, to serve, and with every generation a chilling question lingers. Are we truly free, or still bound to an ancient, unseen design? The Anunnaki are gone from the surface of the world. But what if the puppet masters never actually left?